Hello, this is Mary Prasad. You can visit me at awashwithcolor.com. In this video, I'll show you how to make a laminated swatch sheet for your palettes. So here's one of my older palettes, and as you can see, I've already made a swatch sheet and it is laminated. By the way, all the products that I mentioned in this video will be linked below in the video description and in the accompanying blog post. As you can see, I have everything labeled. The black marks that you see are to show opacity of each of the colors. You could use the back of this to mix on, but I usually use a porcelain palette. Sometimes I use the bottom tray, as you can see, but most of the time I use a porcelain one like this. The paint doesn't bead up as much on the porcelain palette as it does on the metal or probably on the back of the lamination. So now I'll bring in my recently created palette. This one I created by filling empty half pans with tube watercolors. This special edition tin was already filled with half pans, but I've moved them to a small travel tin, which you'll see in a moment. The swatch sheet, as you can see, is unprotected, which means that any water that gets splashed on it could ruin it. To create my little travel palette, I purchased a tin at one of the stores. It's probably a gift box tin. I'm not actually sure where I bought it originally, but I have some empty half pans here which I plan to fill with more colors since there were only 12 that came in this special edition Schmincke kit. One thing I do with all my pans and half pans is label the sides with the color of the paint that it contains and also the brand of paint. Then I add a magnet on the bottom so that it won't move around in the tin. The self-adhesive magnet tapes from Xyron makes it super easy to apply the magnets. Now the pans that I get, I just bought off of Amazon. There's these little empty pans. I have a variety of them. Sometimes they come in bags, a couple of them came in boxes. They don't always match perfectly with the originals, but it doesn't really matter. You don't see that very much when it's in the tin. Here are some I got in the bag. These are the ones I used for this one. I think there were about 50 of them originally. Here's some that I got in a box. They were actually a different size and a little bit different shape. I like to keep a variety of them around. Some match the manufactured ones a little better than others, and some of them you can actually squeeze in between the two rows that come in a manufacturer's box, watercolor palette box, and that way you can fit some in where the brush usually goes and get a lot more paint. I don't usually put my brushes in with the paint set. To write the color name on the sides, I just use an extra fine Sharpie black. This one is a little hard to get open, sorry. But I just put the color name on from the tube. I try to fit the whole name in on the one side, and then I usually shorten it for the shorter sides, so it will be on two of the sides. And then I write the name of the manufacturer on the other side. I highly recommend labeling these while they are empty. If you don't, it's possible you will stick your finger in the paint while it's not quite dry, or possibly forget what color is inside. So I do all this prep work before filling with the tubes. Next, I'll use the Xyron magnet tape to put the magnet on the bottom. I just kind of eyeball it. It's really easy to tear. You just put it on the side there where it's supposed to be torn, and then rip a piece off. See how much you need, and just clip off a little bit of the extra because these are just a little bit too long for the pans. You can see that the magnet is pretty strong. I'll just put it on the lid here, but I can shake it around and it won't come off. Even when it's filled, it will stay in place. The nice thing is that they aren't too strong, as they're easy enough to remove from the palette if you wanted to change out colors. Now to fill a pan. Just keep that pan handy just in case the paint starts coming out of the tube a little early. And these paints are pretty easy to fill. They're more liquidy, so you can just squirt them in and they basically flatten themselves. but I always keep a toothpick handy just to move the paint into the corners, especially when the paint is a little thicker or drier. Keep in mind that some paints don't dry the same as other paints. I will be doing a series on creating palettes. This is sort of a precursor to the series, and I'll go over how to make them stick in the pans if they crack and stuff like that later. Sorry you can't see too much with my hand in the way, but I'm basically just pushing the paint into the corners with the toothpick. Once you've filled the pans, you'll want to put them in a safe place to dry. I just put the lid on sort of loose so that they can dry but not get dust on them. Now to create the actual swatch card, I'm going to cut a piece of watercolor paper down to size. The way I size it is I measure the lid, but since it's not going to fit in the corners yet, I measure it so that it fits in each direction. And that's how I cut it. To round the corners so that my swatch card will fit better in the lid, I'm going to use a We Are Memory Keepers Crocodile Corner Chomper. This one has two settings, 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch, and it looks like this one will take the 1/2 inch better. All you do is open up the sides, put the paper in tightly into the corner, and then just chomp. I usually like to do each side once and then flip it over and do them all again. This seems to make them the smoothest rounded corners for my preferences anyway. Next, I want to create the grid and the labels. You can see them here on this one. I typically do the grid in pencil and then I do the labels in a waterproof pen. I use a mechanical pencil for the lines and a Copic multiliner, this one's a 0.2, to label everything. To help ensure that my lines are straight, I'm going to use a T-square. This one's actually pretty inexpensive. What I do is I count the number of rows and columns that I want, and then I just evenly divide that up each way. I usually use the centimeter side because there's more tick marks, and I think it's a little bit easier to divide everything up. And oops, I already made a mistake, so I grabbed my trusty Tombow Mono Zero eraser and erased that mark. This eraser is very small and gets in the tiniest places. I highly recommend getting one. I'm just going to speed through marking the dots and drawing the lines, but I did want to note one thing. When I'm drawing the lines, in order to keep the T-ruler on the edge of the paper, it sometimes helps to turn the paper around. When only one side of it is on the paper, it makes it a little more difficult to keep the thing straight. A few of the dots I made were a little too conspicuous, so I just lightened them up or erased them completely. At this point, I decided to erase one of the lines and put the name of the watercolors down here at the bottom. When I do my swatches, I usually go from dark to light, so this will be in the lighter area and it will have a little bit more room. As I mentioned before, I'm using a black Copic multiliner 0.2 in size. This is the SP version, which I much prefer because the plastic ones, once they're empty, they're just basically going to be thrown away and put in a landfill somewhere. These I think are more economical in the long run. You can refill them. You can even change out the nibs, although I've never had to so far. To show you the lamination process, I'm just going to use the one I showed you earlier. I'm not going to paint the other one since I haven't filled up the other pans, but I wanted you to see how they look when they're dry. They do go a little concave. If that bothers you, you can top them off and do them in layers as they actually do in the factory for schminke. But this doesn't bother me. I usually just use them in the concave area where the water will gather. Okay, so now to laminate this thing. I'm going to be using my Creative Station by Xyron with a double-sided cold laminate cartridge. The cold laminate, unlike a hot laminate, you can cut right up to the edges of the paper and it will not come apart. This is very simple. Right now I actually have a permanent adhesive cartridge in there and it's the full size. I'm going to remove that. It's very simple to do. All you do is you push the button, and I had unlatched it earlier, which is why it came up. But normally you push the button and you pull that up, and then you just pull out the cartridge that was in there. You don't have to do anything else, just take it out, and if you need to use it again, you just put it right back in. Now I'm going to use a smaller 5-inch cartridge, which also fits in this version of the machine. I'm just going to put that on the door so you can see in here. This little piece here comes up, and that's going to hold the other side of the cartridge. Here's the laminate cartridge. See, it's only 5 inches. So I'm going to pull up that little piece inside and just pop it right on in. Oops, I forgot one more thing. In the back of the cartridge, there's a little flap that should be there where the two pieces of plastic meet. You're going to take that and put that in between the roller bars in the back of the unit so that it sort of feeds in. So as you're putting the cartridge in, just keep your finger on it, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but it will be in between those two rollers back there. You can kind of see my finger feeding it through there. It's usually not that hard. I'm just trying to get it in the camera. But you just get it in there and then close the door, and that will close the rollers on it, and then you'll be ready to start. Once I closed the door, I just rolled it forward a little bit so that you could see it out the back side. So there it is. It's been fed through. To put the swatch sheet in, you just feed it in until you feel a little resistance back there. That means it's getting stuck in the adhesive. And then you just use the crank to manually bring it through. Once it's all the way through, you're going to use the little blade on the back to cut it off. Because the watercolor paper has a bit of a texture, I use a bone folder to go over the entire thing to really flatten the adhesive down and the laminate down on the colors. This will make them more saturated looking and also help seal them in. I also go around the edges on both sides just to make sure it's been adhered well. Finally, I'm going to cut around all the edges up real close to the edge of the paper and then re-round the corners. This tin had a little bit of a smaller rounded corner, so I'm using the 1/4 inch size chomp. And there you have it, your perfectly protected custom swatch sheet. If you like this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and kindly leave me a message, as this helps this channel. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great day.